Brothers and sisters, our topic this morning is the power of perspective. And I suppose there's an illustration on this slide that's the classical illustration of perspective. There's a glass with liquid about halfway full. Some people might say the glass is half empty. Other people might say the glass is half full. And that's what perspective is. It's about looking at something from different points of view. And there is a power in perspective, obviously. So that is the discussion this morning. And I guess my topic this morning came about from normal, everyday parenting. Now, as a parent, it's not uncommon that you have to correct a child when you witness them make expressions of ingratitude. For example, your child might not want to eat dinner because they don't like the taste. Or they may feel a sense of injustice because they didn't get a certain toy that they wanted. Perhaps they are expressing frustration because they didn't get to watch television because you told them they have to go to bed. If you're anything like me, you often approach these situations in a way to get your child to realize where their little grievances sit in the wider scope of life. You try to reason with your children to see that they should be grateful. Okay, maybe you didn't like the meal, but what about the children around the world who have gone without food today? Okay, maybe it's not you didn't get the toy you wanted, but I'm sure there's someone out there who would appreciate that their parents even thought about them. Maybe you didn't get to watch the show you wanted, but have you thought about the kids out there who don't have any shelter to sleep under, a warm bed, or a loving family? Parenting seems to be a constant battle of shifting a child's perspective from their own self-interested issues to one of gratitude for the blessings they have each and every day. And when you think about that, parenting is in fact a reflection of the relationship between us and God. God seems to be giving us adults, and me especially, the same parenting lessons over and over again. Like our children, we as adults seem to get caught up in life's cares, perplexities, and trials. And oftentimes we react selfishly and focus on our trials as though they are a cross that is too hard to bear. It's of course easier to speak about changing your perspective in the midst of trouble, but as we all know, it's not easily done. And yet, time and again, when we have also experienced the pain of not doing so. Jesus asks his disciple a simple question in the book of Luke, chapter 12:25. He says, "And which of you, with taking thought, can add to his stature 1 cubit?" This question that Jesus asked his disciples is as relevant today for us. And the question was didn't really require an answer from the disciples because experience told them that you cannot add anything to your life by worry and anxiety. By constantly focusing on what is lacking in your life rather than what you have been blessed with. I'm going to read from Sons and Daughters of God, page 116, paragraph 4 and 5. "Suppose you try to count all your blessings. You have thought so little upon them, and they have been so continual. And when reverses or afflictions come, you are grieved and think God is unjust. You do not call to mind how little gratitude you have manifested for all the blessings of God. You have not deserved them, but because they have flowed in upon you day by day, year by year, you have looked upon them as a matter of course, thinking it was your right to receive every advantage and give nothing in return. The blessings of God are more than the hairs of our head, more than the sands of the seashore. Meditate upon his love and care for us, and may it inspire you with love that trials cannot interrupt nor afflictions quench. If we could only see the many dangers from which we are daily preserved by the holy angels, instead of complaining of our trials and misfortunes, we would talk continually of the mercies of God. I'm sure that, like me, this is a problem that each one of us can relate to. It is a familiar scenario when we are brought to test and trial again and again. When we see it in our own children, we think to ourselves, how many times do I have to correct you until you get it? But how little do we recognize how many times we have been the one in need of correction. How patient a God we serve. That He, despite our ingratitude, continues to preserve us from harm and continually blesses us each new day. Now, we might not have God physically hovering over us like we as parents, turning our children's minds to the thoughts of gratitude whenever we are being selfish, but He does have His agents for bringing about a change of perspective, and they are in fact the trials that beset us. Acts of the Apostles 5:24 paragraph 2 reads, "Trial is part of the education given in the school of Christ to purify God's children from the dross of earthliness. It is because God is leading His children that trying experiences come to them. Trials and obstacles are His chosen method of discipline and His appointed conditions of success. He who reads the hearts of men knows their weaknesses better than they themselves can know them. He sees that some have qualifications which, if rightly directed, could be used in the advancement of His work. In His providence, He brings these souls into different positions and varied circumstances, that they may discover the defects that are concealed from their own knowledge. He gives them opportunity to overcome these defects and to fit themselves for service. Often He permits the fires of afflictions to burn, that they may be purified." So God brings trials before us in order to mold us and cut away from our selfishness. Trials of themselves do not produce the work God intends, because we all know that everyone in this world suffers from trials, Christian or not. What really makes a change in us is how we react to those trials. It is about perspective. Or as we have just read, it is about taking the opportunity to overcome our defects and our natural reactions. The Bible gives us ample examples of godly men and women in the severest of trials overcome by a change of perspective, by seeing the blessing in the burden, by being appreciative of what they have rather than what they have lost. Let us consider the story of Job, found in Job chapter 1, which by coincidence is my favorite story in the Bible. The first chapter sets the scene of this man named Job, who was exceedingly wealthy, exceedingly blessed. He had property, family, livestock, everything that one could hope to possess, and he possessed it in abundance. So one day Satan comes to heaven, and God asks him to consider Job, who faithfully and enthusiastically praised God each and every day for his blessings. Satan says to God, "Well, Job only worships you because you've given him everything. If you take it away, he'll curse you instead." So God allows Satan to take away everything from Job, save his life, and to see the results. Satan gets to work, and whilst Job is carrying along with his daily duties, a messenger comes running, telling him all his oxen and ass were stolen, and his servants were slaughtered. Before the messenger finishes speaking, another messenger comes to him, running, and says, "All the camels have been stolen, and the servants have been killed." If this wasn't bad enough, a final servant comes running to Job and tells him his sons and daughters have been crushed to death after the house fell in on them. Now Job could rightfully have lost his mind in that moment. Can you imagine the pain to hear all those things all at once? What a terrible situation. And yet, how did Job immediately react to that?
He still worshipped God no matter what.
That's right. We read about it in Job chapter 1, verses 20 to 22. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. I get teary every time I hear those verses. They're my favorite verses. Put everything into perspective, don't they? And I don't know, if that is not the ultimate perspective of gratitude, I don't know what it is. Faced with such a significant loss of material substance and of his own children, Job placed his trials into the wider scope of life. He remembered his very life was by the grace of God, that he entered the world with nothing and that he would leave it with nothing. And so anything that he acquired in between the point of life and the point of death was God's to give and was God's to take away. How is it that Job could face such a heartbreaking trial and still think of gratitude? Because gratitude was his daily practice, as it should be ours. Review and Herald, May 28, 1889, paragraph 4. We should accustom the heart to dwell in a frame of gratitude and praise. The more we praise God, the more we shall have to praise Him for, and our hearts will become attuned to His praise. Let us consider another story, the story of Joseph. Now we all know Joseph was betrayed into slavery by his brothers, that he was falsely imprisoned, and that he ascended to become an advisor of the Pharaoh and ultimately reunite with his family and find a place of safety for his people. When Joseph came face to face with his brothers, he could have slayed them. He could have made them his servants. But interestingly, he chose to look at his great ordeal with a different perspective. We read about it in Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with us, yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. What an attitude to take. Rather than seeing his trial as a great betrayal on his brother's part, he chose to look at it with an attitude of gratitude. Had it not been for him being sold into slavery, he would not have been able to deliver his family from the present terrible drought they were suffering. Joseph chose to see God's grace in the midst of his suffering. Maranatha 367, paragraph 2 reads, God has provided for man subjects of thought which will bring into activity every faculty of the mind. We may read the character of the Creator in the heavens above and the earths beneath, filling the heart with gratitude and thanksgiving. Every nerve and sense will respond to the expressions of God's love in His marvelous work. Everything above and below, everything in our life, you can read God's love in it if you but look for it. If you but have the perspective of gratitude, looking for God's love rather than looking inwardly at your selfishness. it is clear to see that perspective provides for us an avenue to maintain peace and to hold on to our faith in the most trying of circumstances. But not only so, perspective is also a powerful safeguard of our physical health. And recent research in the field of positive psychology attests to the power of grateful thinking. And this is from a Robert Emmons, who's a PhD from the University of California. He wrote a book called Gratitude Works, and he said, consciously cultivating an attitude of gratitude builds up a sort of psychological immune system that can cushion us when we fall. There is scientific evidence that grateful people are more resilient to stress, whether minor everyday hassles or major personal upheavals. Gratitude blocks toxic emotions such as envy, resentment, regret, and depression, which can destroy our happiness. It's amazing what science is discovering very now in this day and age. But what's more amazing is that this is what God has been saying for ages eternal. Proverbs chapter 17 verse 22 tells us, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. And the spirit of prophecy says in Ministry of Healing 251 paragraph 3, nothing tends more to promote health of body and of soul than does a spirit of gratitude and praise. It is a positive duty to resist melancholy, discontent thoughts and feelings as much as it is a duty to pray. If we are heaven bound, how can we go as a band of mourners, groaning and complaining all the way to our Father's house? Isn't that amazing? Science is discovering this now. God has been saying this for ages eternal. Apart from cultivating perspective through daily praise and gratitude, there is an additional and equally important way to obtain a perspective of gratitude, and that is through service. We are all woven together in the great web of humanity. And whatever we do to benefit and uplift others will reflect in blessings upon ourselves. The joy of service and the perspective it creates in your life is not merely something you can talk about. It is something that you have to experience to realize how much it can impact your life. And our missionary brothers and sisters here can attest to that. How important missionary service is, the joy of being a blessing to others, which brings an even more bigger blessing upon yourself. In my former work, I had the opportunity to work with asylum seekers and refugees in detention. This experience brought me in daily contact with the needs and sufferings of others, and was a huge eye-opener to exactly how fortunate my life was and how small my problems were. Some years ago, I had the opportunity to work in Nauru, a tiny island nation in Micronesia. I had been given the responsibility of managing the welfare of asylum seekers sent there for offshore processing. For 4 months, I gained a perspective on what mattered in life and how insignificant my problems were. Do you know what it is like to see a man at his most bare? To put aside all things, to strip it bare, and to see a person as a soul? In Nauru, I certainly did. Can you imagine speaking encouragement to a man who had just tried to hang himself because he might never see his family again? Can you imagine holding the hand of a man as he rocked to and fro, tears streaming and fearful that at any moment someone may burst into his hospital room and kill him? Can you imagine convincing a man to eat again after he had starved himself for 40 days? Can you imagine speaking to a man who had sewed his lips together while sitting in a shallow grave he had made because this was the only thing in his life he could control? Can you imagine walking the halls of a prison, looking into the eyes of men just a little older than children, and elderly men, all appealing to you to get them out, while knowing they may spend the rest of their lives there? When you spend a lot of time with people at their weakest, most vulnerable, and most humiliated, do you see how grateful you should be for your life? Before I left Nauru, there was a huge riot at the processing center, causing $60 million worth of damage. I remember that night like it was just yesterday. A friend of mine wrote a book about it, in fact, and here is a little idea of what happened. The sky was ablaze with a dramatic Pacific sunset. Just when the heat was supposed to be leaving the day to make way for the refreshing night's breezes, the camp was sweltering with the shouts of the imprisoned. A chaotic atmosphere of chanting and screaming, large groups of people disappearing in and out of the dark while baseball-sized objects whistled through the air. Dust mingled with smoke and fire, blinding and suffocating them. Fires streak across the night sky. Protesters were burning down one building after the other. Fear spread through the island. Local crowds arrived wielding weapons. The men pleaded. They were scared they would be attacked or killed. Can you imagine just how grateful for my life I was when in this moment I didn't know whether I or someone I worked with or someone in the center might die? You can see in the picture the devastation of that riot, and that building at the front was where I worked. Experiences like these cement in your mind how small your problems really are. When I face trials, I think back to these experiences. Maybe I don't like the taste of dinner. I think to myself, remember those men sitting in prison, 15 to a cell, with nothing but a plastic bag of boiled rice to eat? Perhaps I feel a sense of injustice because I didn't get a certain job I wanted. I remember the fishermen from a village in Sri Lanka who used their whole life savings to take a perilous journey to the unknown, all for a better life, and to be sitting in detention for 3 years. Maybe I get a bit frustrated because I missed my favorite television show. I recall the men who miss their families and haven't seen them for 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 years. Perspective is a powerful thing. How will you choose to see your trials, brothers and sisters? How will you choose to view your life? Are you grateful, or do you need a change in perspective? The last quote, Gospel Workers 477, paragraph 3. If as workers for Christ you feel that you have had greater cares and trials than have fallen to the lot of others, remember that for you there is a peace unknown to those who shun these burdens. There is comfort and joy in the service of Christ. Let the world see that life with him is no failure. My brothers and sisters, we all face trials. We all go through disappointments, but put them in perspective. You might think it's a hard thing to serve God, and sure, there are many sacrifices we have to make in serving God, but we have a great joy ahead of us, a great peace that is unknown to those who do not know what service is. So whatever you're dealing with, whatever battles, whatever demons you're facing, brothers and sisters, change your perspective. Have gratitude that God has chosen you from amongst the world, that He has seen value in you, in your soul, that Christ has died for you. And all those problems that you face each and every day won't be so big. They will be small. And in fact, you'll be grateful for those problems because you know God is trying to work to build your character. Just like the little cartoon, brothers and sisters, there are two ways to view life. We can look out one window and see the beauty of God around us, see the blessings, or we can look out the other window and see nothing but trials and problems. Which will you choose? Amen.